Gunfire ripped through the jungle without warning. A Navy SEAL hit the dirt, breath locked in his chest as bullets tore leaves apart inches above his head. The mission was collapsing. Too fast, too quiet, too wrong. Then the German shepherd beside him moved. No command, no signal. The dog lunged forward just as the shot cracked. When the SEAL realized what had happened, he dropped his weapon, broke formation, and ran into the fire. Because in that moment, this was no longer a mission. And sometimes, when God intervenes, it's not with thunder. It's with a life that steps in front of yours. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The first shot cracked so close, it felt like the air itself had been punched. The man dropped instinctively, shoulders slamming into the mud as dirt exploded inches from his head. Someone screamed a warning behind him, half swallowed by gunfire, and the forest that had been quiet a second earlier erupted into chaos. Bullets tore through leaves, snapping branches, chewing bark off trees. He rolled, came up on one knee, rifle already shouldered, mind cold and sharp in the way it only ever was when everything else fell away. This was not fear. This was function. "Contact front," a voice shouted, tight with strain. The man raised his hand in a sharp signal, fingers cutting through smoke. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like someone who had learned long ago how to make his body a tool. His face was hard, weathered, beard dark and rough with streaks of gray, jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped beneath his skin. His eyes, steel blue and tired, tracked movement through the trees with brutal efficiency. He had the look of a man who had survived by never hesitating, and by never asking whether survival came at a cost. Beside him, the dog froze, not crouched, not panicked, just still. The German shepherd stood out even in the mess of motion and noise, its black and tan coat streaked with mud, muscles locked beneath its tactical harness. One ear stood tall, alert. The other bent slightly forward, a permanent reminder of an old injury. Its amber eyes were fixed not on the gunfire ripping through the trees, but on the ground directly ahead of the man, as if the real danger had not yet arrived. "Ranger, down!" the man snapped. The dog ignored him. Another explosion ripped through the forest, closer this time. The man swore under his breath, shifting his weight forward, preparing to move. That was when Ranger lunged, not at the enemy, not toward the sound of gunfire, but straight into him. The impact was brutal, knocking the man flat on his back, the breath driven clean out of his lungs. In the same heartbeat, the earth where he had been standing detonated. A pressure wave slammed into them, hot and violent, flinging dirt and shrapnel through the air. The blast was so close, it felt personal. When the ringing in his ears faded enough for sound to return, the man realized two things at once. He was alive, and Ranger was on top of him. The dog's paws pressed into his chest, heavy, grounding, its body trembling with effort as if holding itself between him and the world. It did not bark. It did not whine. It lowered its head and pressed its nose against his throat, breathing hard, as though counting his breaths, making sure he was still there. "Jesus," someone muttered nearby. No one was dead. One man had taken shrapnel in the leg, another was bleeding from the scalp. But they were alive. Everyone understood what that meant. If the man had taken one more step, there would have been nothing left to recover. The man pushed Ranger aside and sat up, chest burning, hands shaking just enough that he clenched them into fists. He scanned the blast site, eyes narrowing. A mine, buried deep, invisible, perfect. He swallowed, throat dry. did you know?" he whispered, not caring if anyone heard. Ranger didn't look at him. The dog's gaze remained locked on the ruined patch of earth, body rigid, as if it were watching something finish unfolding. "Move!" the man barked, forcing himself back into command. They moved, rerouting through thicker brush, adrenaline burning hot beneath skin. Atlas, shorter than the man, heavier through the chest, face set in permanent skepticism, shot Ranger a hard look. Atlas trusted plans, trusted orders, trusted anything that could be written down and checked twice. Dogs were tools, not prophets. But he said nothing. No one did. Night fell heavy and wet. Camp went up fast, quiet. The forest breathed around them, alive with unseen movement. The man lay on his cot, staring at the canvas above, replaying the moment again and again. The pull, the impact, the blast. He had trusted maps and training his entire career. He had never trusted animals to know what men could not. Outside, something shifted. Soft padding. Controlled. Familiar. He unzipped the tent flap and found Ranger sitting there, perfectly upright, eyes open, watching the dark. The dog did not lie down, did not pace. It simply sat guard like a sentry that had decided this post mattered more than any other. "Go back," the man said quietly. "Get some rest." Ranger rose at once and obeyed, walking several steps away. Then it stopped. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its head and looked back at him. The look was not obedient, not questioning. It was old, heavy, as if the dog were seeing something in him that had been there long before this mission, long before this forest. The man's chest tightened, irritation flaring sharp and unwanted. He zipped the tent shut harder than necessary and lay back down, eyes open long after sleep should have come. They moved again before dawn. The forest thickened, ground uneven, roots like traps waiting for a misstep. Ranger ranged ahead, nose low, then high, constantly adjusting, changing direction by inches. The man watched closely now, more than he wanted to admit. The dog paused at places that looked harmless, angled them away from roots that felt safe. Atlas muttered once under his breath. The man ignored him. Midway through the march, Ranger stopped dead. Not at a choke point, not at cover, just open ground. The leash went taut. Ranger refused to move. "Come on," the man said, tension creeping into his voice. The dog turned and pressed its forehead briefly, firmly, against the man's chest. The contact was intimate, intentional. The man froze. Something inside him cracked open just enough for a memory to try to surface. Another forest, years ago. A younger man, laughing softly. The same black and tan blur streaking ahead through brush. He shoved it down hard. "Fine," he muttered. They detoured. Minutes later, gunfire and explosions ripped through the path they would have taken. No one said a word. That night, Ranger returned to his tent. Sat, watched. The man didn't tell him to leave. Somewhere between sleep and waking, a thought crept in uninvited. What if this isn't the first time he's done this for me? If this story stirred something in you? If you believe that God sometimes sends protection in forms we don't recognize at first, through loyalty, instinct, and silent guardians who stand watch when we cannot, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs, just in time. They moved before the light fully settled into the trees, when the forest still felt undecided about whether it belonged to night or morning. Moisture clung to leaves and gear alike, turning every surface slick and unforgiving. Jack kept his pace steady, deliberate, letting the rhythm of movement pull his thoughts back into order. He told himself that yesterday had been luck layered on training, instinct layered on probability. That was how survival worked. That was how it had always worked. And yet, his eyes kept drifting to the dog ahead of him. Ranger moved differently now. Not faster, not slower, but with a kind of restless precision that Jack hadn't noticed before. The German shepherd's black and tan coat was darkened by damp earth, muscles shifting beneath the harness as he tested the ground with each step. His nose dipped low, then lifted, sampling the air in short, sharp breaths. When he changed direction, it wasn't dramatic. Just a subtle veer, a quiet refusal to take the most obvious path. Jack adjusted without comment, but he felt the tension build behind him. Atlas was the first to say something. He always was. Atlas Boone was built like a reinforced door. Thick neck, square shoulders, hands that looked permanently clenched even when relaxed. His beard was trimmed too neatly for the jungle, a habit from years of clinging to routine when everything else felt uncertain. Atlas trusted systems because systems didn't hesitate, didn't improvise, didn't remember things they shouldn't. "We're drifting," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Map says straight through." Jack slowed, but didn't stop. "Map doesn't smell explosives," he said, surprised at how easily the words came. Atlas exhaled sharply, the sound halfway between frustration and restraint. He glanced at Ranger, then back at Jack. "Dogs read what's already there, not what might be." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel it again, that subtle pressure under the ribs, the same one he'd felt before the mine went off. Ranger paused near a fallen log, head tilting slightly, one ear twitching. He stepped sideways, pulling the leash just enough to signal a change. Jack hesitated. The clearing ahead looked harmless. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, touching the ground in clean, inviting patches. It was the kind of place you wanted to believe was safe. Jack looked down at the map in his hand. Clean lines, clean logic. Then he looked at Ranger. The dog wasn't tense in the way of fear. He was focused, alert, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. "All right," Jack said quietly. "We go wide." Atlas stopped walking. "Jack, I said wide." They shifted course. 10 minutes later, the forest behind them erupted. Gunfire cracked sharp and sudden, followed by the deep, concussive thump of explosives. Birds scattered into the sky. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Jack didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew what he would see if he did, and he knew Atlas knew it too. When the sounds faded, Atlas said nothing. He simply tightened his jaw and continued forward. As they moved, Jack found himself watching Ranger with an intensity that bordered on unease. The dog's movements felt familiar in a way he couldn't place. Not the training. He knew what trained dogs looked like. This was something else. Ranger paused before a narrow ravine, choosing a longer descent instead of the direct drop. He skirted the edges of thickets rather than cutting through their center. Each choice was small, each one added time, each one felt deliberate. A memory brushed the edge of Jack's mind, unwanted and persistent. Another forest, another pace. A voice laughing softly behind him, younger, looser. "Relax, Jack. He's got this." Jack clenched his jaw and pushed the thought away. There was no room for that now. There had never been room for it. They pressed on until the day warmed and sweat soaked through fabric. Around midday, Ranger slowed abruptly. Jack signaled a halt. The dog stood still, nose lifted, body angled slightly left. There was nothing obvious, no footprints, no broken brush, no smell Jack could detect. Ranger took a step back, then another, gently pulling Jack with him. "Hold," Jack murmured. Atlas frowned. "What is it now?" Ranger turned his head and looked directly at Jack. Then, without warning, he stepped in close and pressed his forehead against Jack's chest. The contact was firm, brief, unmistakably intentional. Jack froze. His breath caught, sharp and involuntary. For a heartbeat, the forest disappeared, replaced by the echo of something old and heavy. He felt the ghost of a hand clapping his shoulder, the warmth of a grin he hadn't seen in years. "Jack." Atlas's voice snapped him back. "We good?" Jack swallowed. "Yeah," he said, though he wasn't sure what he meant. "We're good." They adjusted course again. This time, the ambush came from the direction Ranger had steered them away from, bullets tearing through the space they would have occupied minutes earlier. No one spoke afterward. No one argued. The silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was something closer to awe. They reached the outer edge of the hostile zone by late afternoon. Jack finally allowed a pause. He crouched beside Ranger, fingers brushing the worn handle of the harness. The dog's breathing slowed as soon as Jack touched him, muscles easing just slightly. Jack felt something twist in his chest. "How do you know?" he asked softly. "What are you hearing?" Ranger didn't answer. He never did. He simply turned his gaze back toward the forest, vigilant, waiting. That night, as camp settled into uneasy rest, Jack pulled Ranger's file from his pack. He hadn't meant to. The thought had lodged itself too deep to ignore. The file was thin, edges worn, the kind that had been handled too many times by too many people who didn't want to read it. Jack skimmed past the technical notes, the dates, the commendations. His eyes caught on a name, a surname that matched his own. His pulse spiked. He closed the file quickly, breath shallow, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. It meant nothing, he told himself. Coincidence. There were a lot of names in the world, too many to count. He shoved the file back into his pack and lay down, staring at the dark. Outside, Ranger sat watch again, not pacing, not restless, just there. Jack didn't sleep much. When dawn crept in, gray and quiet, he sat up and looked at the dog with new eyes. Ranger met his gaze calmly, head tilted, as if waiting for Jack to catch up to something that had always been there. If you believe that some warnings come before the danger, that faith sometimes arrives not as answers, but as instincts placed in our path by God, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Sometimes miracles don't shout. They wait. The camp they were closing in on did not announce itself with fences or lights. It sat low and quiet between two ridgelines, hidden by scrub and broken rock. The kind of place designed to disappear if you weren't looking for it. Jack slowed the team with a raised fist, eyes narrowing as he scanned through his optics. Heat signatures clustered tight, armed, alert. The clock in the corner of his vision ticked forward with unforgiving precision. They were late. Every delay tightened the margin, every deviation from plan narrowing their chances of getting the hostages out alive. Ranger moved beside him, body tense, black and tan fur dusted pale by dry earth. The dog's tail stayed low, ears forward, nose working the air in short bursts. Jack had learned to read those signals over the last 48 hours, learned what they meant when Ranger angled away, when he slowed, when he stopped. What he hadn't learned, what he was still resisting, was what to do when Ranger reacted to something that had nothing to do with the mission. It happened as they skirted the eastern edge of the camp. Ranger froze mid-step, then surged forward hard enough to pull the leash taut. Jack stumbled, catching himself just in time. The dog lunged toward a cluster of rocks partially concealed by brush, growling low in his chest. Not aggressive, not panicked, but urgent. "Ranger," Jack hissed. "Easy." The dog didn't ease. He pulled again, claws digging into dirt, eyes locked on the rocks. Atlas slid in close, rifle angled outward, jaw tight. What now? Jack followed Ranger's gaze and saw it. A figure slumped against stone, wrists bound behind their back with rough cord. A man. Mid-30s, maybe. Thin to the point of fragility, clothes torn and stained dark with dried blood. His head hung forward, chin to chest, hair matted and black. When he lifted his face weakly, Jack caught a glimpse of eyes, wide, glassy, terrified. Ranger strained harder, whining softly now, the sound cutting sharp through Jack's nerves. Hostage? Atlas whispered. Jack checked his watch. Then the map. The man by the rocks wasn't marked. No secondary targets. No mention of prisoners outside the main compound. Everything about the situation screamed trap, delay, complication. Jack felt the familiar tightening under his ribs, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. He thought of the clock, thought of the people inside the camp, thought of how many times hesitation had cost lives. Negative, he said, forcing his voice steady. He's not on the list. Ranger barked once, a sharp, broken sound Jack had never heard from him before. The dog planted himself between Jack and the bound man, body rigid, eyes blazing. Jack, Atlas said, quieter now. We don't have time for this. Jack looked at the man again. The prisoner's lips moved, though no sound came out. His shoulders sagged as if whatever hope had flared was already dying. Jack felt something stir in his chest, something dangerous, something that threatened the clean lines he relied on to make decisions. He crushed it. Move, Jack ordered. We're not blowing the op. Ranger didn't move. Jack stepped forward and tightened his grip on the leash, pulling the dog back by force. Ranger resisted for a heartbeat, muscles trembling, then yielded, head lowering as if something inside him had broken loose. Jack didn't look back as they retreated into cover, didn't let himself glance over his shoulder. He focused on the mission. He always had. They were less than 200 meters away when the shot rang out. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. Just a single flat crack that sliced through the air with surgical precision. Jack felt it more than he heard it, a cold line running straight down his spine. No one spoke. No one turned around. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. They completed the recon. They marked positions. They planned entry routes. They did everything right. And still, the sound followed Jack like a shadow. Night fell heavy and suffocating. Camp was established farther back, hidden beneath a canopy thick enough to swallow moonlight. Jack sat alone, back against a tree, helmet off, staring at nothing. Ranger lay several feet away, not close enough to touch. The dog's back was turned to him, body curled tight, tail tucked. When Jack shifted, Ranger didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him at all. Jack had never felt rejection like that from an animal, not anger, not fear. This was something colder, something final. He reached into his pack and pulled out Ranger's file. The pages felt heavier than they should have. He flipped past the standard entries, the clinical language, the lists of deployments. His eyes snagged on a line halfway down the page. Previous handler, Ethan Calder. Jack's breath left him in a sharp rush. His vision blurred around the edges as the name burned itself into his mind. Ethan, his younger brother, the one who laughed too easily, trusted too deeply. The one who had insisted on handling dogs because they don't lie, Jack. They don't pretend. Jack remembered the call, the sterile room, the officer's voice, careful and flat. KIA, equipment failure, no further details. Jack had signed the papers. He had gone back to work. Ranger shifted, ears flicking back briefly, then settled again. Jack looked at the dog, at the scar on his muzzle, the bent ear, the way his chest rose and fell with controlled restraint. He saw it all differently now. The timing, the reactions, the way Ranger had pressed his forehead into Jack's chest earlier that day, as if grounding himself in something familiar. "You knew," Jack whispered. "Didn't you?" Ranger didn't turn around. Jack closed the file slowly, hands shaking despite his effort to still them. He understood then, not just with his mind, but with something deeper. Something he had spent years burying. Ranger hadn't been transferred. He hadn't been reassigned. He had been left behind. Just like Ethan had been. Just like the man by the rocks. Jack sat there until the cold crept into his bones, until the forest began to stir with pre-dawn life. He didn't reach for Ranger. He didn't speak again. Some distances couldn't be crossed by orders or apologies. Some choices carved lines that never faded. If this moment made you stop and think, if you believe that God sees the choices we wish we could take back, and still places lessons and even second chances in our path, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith often begins where certainty ends. The main detention compound revealed itself slowly, like something reluctant to be seen. Concrete walls sank into the earth rather than rising from it, stained dark by weather and neglect. A single watchtower leaned slightly to one side, its silhouette crooked against the pale sky. Jack studied it through his optics, jaw set, mind already calculating angles, distances, risks. This was the place. The people they were here for were inside. He could feel the weight of it pressing down on his chest, heavier than gear, heavier than responsibility. Ranger moved at his side, but something was different. The dog did not pull toward the compound the way he had toward other objectives. His nose dipped, then lifted, then dipped again, confused not by absence, but by excess. Too many scents, too much fear, too much old pain layered over new. Ranger slowed, ears twitching, then abruptly turned away from the compound entirely. "Ranger," Jack whispered sharply. The leash went taut as the dog angled toward a narrow path leading away from the main structure, into a cluster of half-collapsed shacks built from rusted sheet metal and rotting wood. Jack frowned. This was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The priority target was straight ahead. The hostages were supposed to be inside the compound, guarded, cataloged, controlled. This side area wasn't on any map. Atlas crept closer, rifle steady, voice low. "He's off task." Jack didn't answer. He followed Ranger's gaze. The dog stopped beside one of the shacks and sat, posture alert but restrained, eyes fixed on the dark opening beneath a sagging roof. "Jack," Atlas said, tension creeping into his tone. "We don't have time to clear side structures." Jack's fingers tightened on the leash. He felt the echo of yesterday's gunshot crawl up his spine, felt the memory of the man by the rocks, his eyes, his silence, the way hope had died without ceremony. He glanced at his watch. Seconds mattered. Lives inside the compound mattered. And yet, Ranger did not move. Jack stepped closer to the shack. The smell hit him first. Stale sweat, blood, sickness. Inside, barely visible in the dim light, lay a woman. She was old. Older than anyone on their list. Her hair, once dark, was now a tangled silver gray, plastered to her skull with sweat. Her skin was thin and sallow, stretched tight over fragile bones. She lay curled on her side, breathing shallowly, one hand clutching her ribs as if holding herself together by sheer will. Her eyes opened when Jack knelt, cloudy but sharp with awareness. Ranger approached her slowly, carefully, lowering himself to the ground beside her. He did not sniff. He did not touch. He simply lay there close enough that she could feel his warmth. The woman's gaze shifted to him, and something softened in her expression. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, voice cracked and brittle. "Don't go." Atlas swore under his breath. "She's not on the list," he said. "Jack, we're pushing the window." Jack felt the moment stretch thin, like a wire pulled too tight. He remembered the sound of that single shot, remembered the way he hadn't turned around. He looked at Ranger, at the dog's stillness, at the way his body formed a quiet barrier between the woman and the world. "We're not leaving her," Jack said. Atlas stared at him. "You're risking everyone for one." "I know," Jack cut in. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Get her up." They moved fast after that. Atlas and another operator lifted the woman carefully, her weight shockingly light, like a bundle of clothes rather than a person. She gasped as they moved her, pain flashing across her face. But she didn't scream. She clutched at Ranger's fur as if anchoring herself to something real. As they withdrew from the shack, Ranger suddenly stiffened. His head snapped toward the compound, then back toward the narrow path behind them. He growled low, a warning Jack had learned to respect. "What is it?" Jack murmured. Ranger took a step back, then another, tugging gently at the leash, urging them away from the main approach. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Follow him." They moved through a barely visible gap between structures, slipping into a shadowed corridor that sank downward into the earth. It was a tunnel, old, forgotten, carved into the ground beneath the compound. The woman stirred in Atlas's arms, eyes fluttering open. "There's a way," she rasped. "Under. Guns can't see you there." Jack's breath caught. "You knew?" She nodded weakly. "I cleaned," she said. Before I couldn't anymore." They followed the tunnel, Ranger leading, body low, movement smooth and confident. The sound of gunfire erupted above them moments later, heavy and sustained. Jack realized with a jolt that if they had taken the main route, they would have walked straight into a kill zone. They emerged beyond the compound's perimeter, hidden by terrain and darkness. The woman sagged against Atlas, strength fading now that danger had passed. Jack knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "You saved us," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "You came back." Jack felt something shift inside him, subtle but profound, like a door opening that had been sealed for years. Ranger sat beside the woman, watchful, steady, his presence unyielding. As they moved farther from the compound, the woman's grip tightened briefly on Jack's sleeve. "There are people," she murmured, "who live only to see if someone will turn around." Jack swallowed. He knew exactly what she meant. Later, as they paused to regroup, Jack crouched beside Ranger, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. Ranger didn't pull away. He didn't lean in. He simply stayed, breathing slow and even, as if acknowledging a choice that could not be undone. But could, at least, be answered. If this moment touched you, if you believe that God sometimes tests us not with danger, but with the chance to turn back and do what we couldn't before, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith often shows itself in the moments we choose not to walk away. They were already moving when the first crack split the air. It wasn't loud, not like the chaos they had left behind. It was clean, distant, precise. Jack felt it before he heard it. A tightening at the base of his skull, the instinct that had kept him alive long enough to learn how fragile survival really was. He dropped his shoulder, shifting his weight, eyes scanning the ridgeline ahead. Somewhere up there, hidden among rock and scrub. A rifle had found him. Ranger reacted first. The German shepherd surged forward without a sound, black and tan body a blur of muscle and motion. Jack shouted his name, but the dog was already moving, already choosing. The second shot came a heartbeat later, sharper, closer. Ranger leapt. The impact was sickening. Ranger's body slammed into Jack's chest, knocking him backward as the round tore through flesh meant to shield something more important than itself. They hit the ground hard. Jack felt the heat of blood before he understood what had happened. He rolled, dragging Ranger with him, hands slipping on the dog's harness, the smell of iron filling his nose. "Sniper!" Atlas yelled, voice raw. "High right!" Jack didn't answer. He dropped his rifle. Let it fall where it landed. He could hear shouting, feel hands grabbing at his vest. But it all faded beneath the weight of Ranger in his arms. The dog's breathing was ragged, shallow, each rise of his chest an effort. His amber eyes were open, focused entirely on Jack, as if nothing else existed. "No, no, no," Jack muttered, voice breaking despite himself. He pressed his hands against Ranger's side, trying to find the wound, to stop what he couldn't see. Blood seeped through his fingers, warm and unstoppable. Gunfire erupted around them as the team returned fire. Jack didn't wait for cover. He didn't wait for orders. He hoisted Ranger into his arms, the dog heavier than he should have been, heavier than memory allowed. Bullets snapped through branches overhead. Dirt sprayed up around his boots. Jack ran anyway, every step a refusal. The world narrowed to motion and breath. Ranger's head lolled against his shoulder, tongue flicking out weakly, a familiar gesture stripped of all its strength. Jack could feel the dog's heart racing against his chest, fast and uneven, like something trying to outrun its own ending. They reached cover just as Atlas dragged them down behind a fallen tree. The team medic was already there, a lean man named Ruiz, with tired eyes and hands that never shook. Ruiz dropped to his knees, fingers moving fast, efficient, assessing damage without hesitation. "Entry wound," he said. "No exit." Jack hovered too close, hands trembling, blood smeared across his forearms. "He's okay," Jack said, more demand than belief. "He's okay." Ruiz didn't look up. "He's alive," he said carefully. He worked in silence after that, cutting away fur, pressing gauze, murmuring things meant to calm a patient who could barely hear them. Ranger whimpered once, low and soft, then went quiet again. They got him stabilized enough to move. The sniper was gone by the time they pushed on, the threat fading into distance, leaving behind only consequences. Ranger survived the extraction, survived the night, survived the things that usually kill dogs like him. But Ruiz knew better than to celebrate. Later, when camp was quiet and the forest had settled back into uneasy stillness, Ruiz sat beside Jack, voice low. "The bullet didn't hit anything vital," he said. "Not right away." Jack nodded, clinging to the words like a lifeline. "So he'll recover." Ruiz hesitated. He was younger than Jack, but his face carried the weight of too many nights like this. "There's internal damage," he said. "Kidney, tissue trauma. It won't show now. Might not show for a while." Jack waited. "It'll catch up to him," Ruiz finished. "I don't know when." Jack stared at the fireless ground between them, jaw tight. "You're not telling him," he said flatly. Ruiz met his gaze. "He already knows," he said quietly. "Animals always do." Jack moved to Ranger's side after that. The dog lay on his blanket, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, eyes half closed but alert enough to track Jack's movement. Jack sat down heavily, every muscle aching, every bone buzzing with the aftermath of adrenaline. He reached out and rested a hand on Ranger's neck, feeling the warmth there, the life that stubbornly refused to let go. "I dropped my rifle," Jack said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could stop them. He let out a humorless breath. "Never thought I'd see the day." Ranger's ear twitched. "I left someone behind once," Jack went on, voice low, raw in a way it hadn't been in years. "Told myself it was the mission. Told myself it was necessary." His throat tightened. "I won't do that again." Ranger opened his eyes fully then. He shifted, just enough to press his head against Jack's thigh. The contact was weak but deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement. Jack swallowed hard and rested his forehead against the dog's, breathing in the familiar scent of fur and antiseptic and earth. "I won't leave you," he whispered, "no matter what." Ranger's tail moved once, slow and heavy, tapping against the ground. Then he settled, breath evening out, eyes closing again. Jack stayed there until dawn, crept in pale and uncertain, until the forest began to stir with birds that didn't know or care what had been lost. There were wounds that bled and healed. And then there were the others. The kind you didn't see right away. The kind that waited. If this moment touched your heart, if you believe that God sometimes sends guardians who stand between us and what we cannot survive alone, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Miracles don't always look like rescue. Sometimes they look like sacrifice. The mission ended without ceremony. There was no clean line between danger and safety. No moment when the world suddenly softened. One day they were moving through hostile ground. The next, they were loading equipment into transport. Bodies carrying the quiet exhaustion of people who had outrun something they could not name. Ranger was cleared to travel, but only just. He walked on his own, head level, posture disciplined, the black and tan coat dulled by scars and time. Jack watched every step, every pause, as if the ground itself might rise up again and demand payment. Back at base, the pace slowed in ways Jack had never learned to handle. Noise faded, schedules thinned. Ranger was evaluated, monitored, declared unfit for frontline deployment, for now. The words landed heavier than any reprimand Jack had ever received. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for exceptions. He knew what "for now" really meant. Jack requested reassignment the same afternoon. Training division. No explanation offered, none requested. The officer who signed the transfer was a tall man with thinning hair and a face shaped by decades of careful distance. He looked at Jack for a long moment, then nodded. "You've done enough," he said, as if that were something Jack could measure. Training was quieter, predictable. Rows of kennels, the smell of disinfectant and warm fur, the low chorus of barking that never quite stopped. Jack moved through it like a ghost, hands in his pockets, eyes always drifting back to Ranger. The dog lay in the shade most days, harness removed, body still carrying the habits of readiness without the strength to answer them. He was 8 now, old for his line of work, ancient by operational standards. His amber eyes followed Jack with the same focus as ever, but the spark of urgency had softened into something else. Acceptance, maybe, or preparation. Ranger ate less, not refusal, never that, but a gradual disinterest. He slept more, curling into himself in ways he never had before. The most telling change was the door. For years, Ranger had stationed himself there whenever Jack moved to leave, body angled forward, ready to block, to warn, to protect. Now, he stayed where he was. He watched. He did not rise. Jack noticed everything. He said nothing. A woman appeared one afternoon while Jack was running drills with younger handlers. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. a civilian consultant brought in to assess long-term canine welfare. She was in her late 40s, tall and slender, with iron-gray hair pulled into a low knot that spoke of practicality rather than style. Her skin was fair, lined by years of sun and concern, and her eyes, soft brown, observant, missed very little. She moved carefully around the dogs, hands slow, voice gentle, as if she understood that trust was something you waited for. "He's been through a lot," she said quietly, standing beside Jack as Ranger lay resting nearby. Jack nodded. "He doesn't complain." Sarah gave a small, sad smile. "They never do." She knelt near Ranger, letting him sniff her hand before touching him. Ranger tolerated it, tail moving once in acknowledgement. Sarah's fingers were light, professional, tracing muscle and bone, feeling what wasn't said. "He's holding himself together," she said. "That takes effort." "For how long?" Jack asked. Sarah met his gaze. "As long as he thinks he needs to." That night, Jack sat on the floor beside Ranger's mat, back against the wall, boots unlaced. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that made memories louder. He rested his hand on Ranger's side, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall. "You don't have to guard anymore," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." Ranger's ear twitched. His eyes stayed closed. Days blurred together. Jack fell into routine, training others to listen, to wait, to read the small signs before they became disasters. He told them stories without names, lessons without dates. He avoided talking about Ranger's past. Some things felt too sacred to explain. Then came the morning. Jack woke early, the way he always had. He dressed in silence, the familiar motions grounding him. He sat on the edge of the bed to lace his boots. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and dog fur, a scent that had become home. "Let's go," he said softly. Habit more than intention. Ranger didn't move. Jack frowned and glanced over. The dog lay where he had been all night, eyes open, watching Jack with calm attention. No attempt to rise, no shift of weight, just stillness. "Come on," Jack said, a touch of confusion creeping into his voice. "Nothing." Jack stood, then stopped. Slowly, he sat back down on the floor in front of Ranger. He didn't reach out. He didn't call again. He just looked. Ranger's breathing was shallow, but even. His gaze steady, not tired, not afraid. Simply finished with standing guard. Jack felt a cold bloom in his chest, spreading outward. This was different from injury, different from exhaustion. This was something Ranger had known was coming long before Jack allowed himself to see it. He leaned forward and rested his forearms on his knees, head bowed. "I get it," he whispered, though his throat tightened around the words. "You knew before I did." Ranger's tail moved once, slow and heavy, then stilled. He shifted his head slightly, angling it so his muzzle rested closer to Jack's foot. A small gesture, a final adjustment. Jack stayed there long after the room brightened with morning light. He didn't pray, he didn't bargain, he simply stayed. For the first time since this all began, Jack was afraid, not of loss, not of death, but of understanding what Ranger had carried alone from the very beginning. If this moment speaks to you, if you believe that God prepares our hearts before our minds are ready, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Sometimes faith arrives not with answers, but with quiet acceptance. Ranger refused to eat. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic. It was simply the absence of movement where movement used to be. Jack noticed it the way you notice a room has gone quiet, too late and all at once. The metal bowl sat where he always placed it, food untouched, the smell still warm. Jack crouched and slid it closer. Ranger lifted his head. His eyes were clear, calm. There was no pain in them, no confusion. He nudged the bowl back with his nose, slow and deliberate, as if returning something that no longer belonged to him. Jack froze. He had issued commands in gunfire. He had spoken clearly while people bled. He had shouted orders that cut through panic like blades. But now, he said nothing. He understood. Jack set the bowl aside. He didn't argue, didn't coax, didn't tell Ranger it would be okay. Instead, he took off his boots, folded them neatly by the wall, and lay down on the floor beside him. The concrete was cold. He welcomed it. He lay on his side, facing Ranger, their foreheads almost touching. "No promises," Jack said quietly. "I won't lie to you." Ranger's breathing was shallow, but steady. His black and tan coat had dulled with age, but the lines of him were still noble, still unmistakably himself. The bent ear, the faint scar along his muzzle. The harness hung nearby, unused, the straps worn smooth by years of service. Jack didn't pray. He had tried prayer before, in different forms, in different moments. This didn't feel like the time for asking. He simply stayed. He counted Ranger's breaths until he stopped counting and just listened. The room was filled with a silence that wasn't empty. It pressed gently like hands on shoulders. Jack felt memories surface without warning. Mud on boots, Ranger standing between him and a doorway. The night Ranger sat awake while Jack slept. The moment in the forest when the dog had chosen to step forward without hesitation. Ranger shifted slightly. His tongue brushed Jack's hand once, slow and rough. A familiar gesture, the last one. Jack closed his eyes. He didn't hold Ranger. He didn't try to keep him. He rested his hand where Ranger could feel it and let the silence do what it came to do. When it was over, it was quiet in a different way. Jack stayed there long after Ranger's chest stopped rising. He stayed until the light changed, until footsteps passed outside the room, until the world continued in its unremarkable way. When he finally stood, his movements were careful, respectful, as if Ranger might still be listening. Months passed. Jack returned to training not because he needed distraction, but because it felt like the right place to stand. The kennels filled with new life, noise, clumsy enthusiasm, untested energy. One dog, a young German shepherd with oversized paws and uncertain ears, caught Jack's attention. The pup was all angles and curiosity. Fur too big for his body, eyes bright with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The Heor handlers laughed when the pup stopped mid-run, nose lifted, refusing to move. "Stubborn one," someone said, tugging gently at the leash. Jack stepped forward. He raised a hand. "Don't," he said. The handler looked at him, confused. "He's just distracted." Jack crouched beside the pup, studying him the way Ranger once studied the world. "If he stops," Jack said, voice steady, "don't pull. Listen." The pup tilted his head, ears twitching. Then he moved again, confidently this time, as if something had resolved inside him. The camera would linger on the empty kennel later. The one Ranger used to occupy. Clean, silent. A single old leash hung on the hook, leather worn smooth by years of hands and purpose. Jack walked past it every day. He never touched it. Some beings don't come into our lives to stay forever. They come to stand in front of us once or twice when it matters most. And when they leave behind a way of listening that never goes away. If this story moved you, if you believe that God sends angels not always with wings, but sometimes on 4 legs and quiet feet, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive as silence that teaches us how to live. Sometimes God does not send miracles in the way we expect. He does not always stop the pain, or erase the loss, or change the outcome we fear. Sometimes the miracle is a presence, a companion who stands in front of us when danger comes, a soul who stays long enough to teach us how to listen, how to love, and how to choose differently than we did before. In our daily lives, we may never walk through a battlefield, but we all face moments where we must decide whether to turn away or turn back, whether to pull forward blindly or pause and listen, whether to protect only ourselves or to stand for someone who cannot stand alone. If this story touched your heart, perhaps it is because God is reminding you of someone who once stood in front of you, or perhaps He is calling you to become that presence for someone else. Please take a moment to share this story with someone who may need comfort, strength, or hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And subscribe to Angels in Uniform so we can continue sharing stories of faith, sacrifice, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He place watchful souls in your path when you need them most. And may you have the courage to listen when love asks you to stop.